Alright, let's have a look at this. So this is a very short animation of about 92, 93 frames that was rendered in Carrara against a black background. And what I'd like to do is composite that against a different animation. So for instance, here's an animation that I created in Dog Waffle. And you'll see basically some sky with some clouds. This was the first version of it, a little bit pale, so I did some enhancements, some color enhancements to give it a little bit more contrast, more saturation on the blue here on the edges. But anyway, I want to composite that. So what I did is I took the original animation and ran the threshold against it so that anything that's not black, it would become white. So that would basically give me something like this, and so I can use that as a selection mask, essentially making the selection of this rotating gizmo. What I really want though is to switch it to the other side, to invert it so that I get this. So it's essentially showing black or non-selected where the gizmo is, and selected or white where the actual background was. And so now I can use that as a selection mask that will composite with the animated background. And when I do that, I'll get a combination of the two. In fact, on this one, I did even more. I then also slowed it down. Right, so I may have 100 or so frames initially, but I wanted to end up having 1,000 frames. So I slowed it down. I also did some other contrast enhancement and some other photo filters on it. So let's have a look at how to do all that. So first of all, let's load the AVI from the animation menu, load AVI, and get me my original that came from Carrara. Alright, so the new feature in version 9 is that you can also indicate what's your starting frame and what's your ending frame. Well, we'll just use them all here right now. This one has a total, I think, of 95 or 96. There are 95 frames, and here they are. Alright, so that's one thing. Then we need to also select the mask which shows the background selected and the gizmo non-selected, so that we can then select yet another thing, which is the background image, the sky, and it will only blend, we will blend them together only through the background area. So we need both the selection mask and the background. Doesn't matter which one we load first, we will load them into separate places. Let's get the background actually first. So let's go to the animation menu, and now this is a new feature in version 9. You have the animated swap image and the animated selection that you can load right there. So under animated swap image, we'll say, hey, let's point to this other AVI file. Which one? Well, the one with the sky. Let's take the one with the nice high contrast. Alright, let's load that. And so now again here too, we can select what's the first frame and the last frame of that animation that we want to retain. Notice this one is a little bit shorter. I messed up here. I only ended up having 93 frames on this animated sky. That's okay. We'll just delete the last 1 or 2 frames. So here we don't need number 94, and we don't need the next one either. So we now have the same number of frames on the foreground as we have frames available in the swap image. Now we don't see the swap image that we loaded. Right, this is the main image here. Now we can switch to that. If we click on the S button here, we can switch to it on this frame, or we can go to another frame, and as we swap through that, as we scrub through that, we can go and say, let's go see perhaps this frame here, and switch these two. So we can frame for frame swap that, and we know we have enabled we are pointing to the AVI file containing the animated sky. That's what we did. We didn't actually load it. We didn't grab it and load it into memory. We didn't open the file to load it into memory, but we did actually open it and decide, okay, we can use that. And it's now checked here as this is active. This is an AVI file that we designated to be used whenever we do compositing or rendering or any sort of operations that involve the background in the AVI file on the swap buffer. Alright, so now we need to combine the two, and really what we could do is a couple of things. We could go to, for instance, testing it just on the filter on the one frame. Let's go to the first frame and say, combine those two. So combine with swap under the filter menu, you actually have a mix buffers, right? We have the main buffer showing this image that we see right here with the gizmo in it, and then we have the swap buffer that contains this image, right? So let's combine the two. Well, if we do this at this level, we don't have a selection mask that prevents one from being protected or replaced by the other. So when we do that, the entire thing is going to be switched or mixed from one side to the other. We can either mix it all the way in favor of the main buffer or all the way in favor of the swap buffer, but we're not going to get both all the way. We can go halfway in the middle, and then we will have halfway in the middle, so we get a little bit of both. But that's not what we want. What we want is to filter that with the selection mask in such a way that we really get all of the sky where the sky is showing, and we get all of the gizmo where the gizmo is showing, right? So that's what we need the swap buffer for, or the selection mask. So let's load that third video. Under the animation again, we have now also the animated selection, and that can be either a DWA, a dog waffle animation, or an AVI file. Who knows, maybe someday it might even be an image file sequence, which would be awesome, but well, that's one step at a time here, baby steps. So open AVI, let's get this in, and we will use this one here because that's the one where we have the, let's see if we can make this bigger now. Okay, that's it. That's the one where we have the background selected, white, and the gizmo not selected, black. And no, it probably would work also the other way around. I don't know. Let's just go with this. This one did work, so let's use that. And open that. So what you see now, after we've selected the whole range again, is that we have a selection mask. You can go and make sure the alpha is on. That will actually be happening all the way. And then as you scrub it, you'll notice that the magic wand is, not the magic wand, the marching ants are showing to indicate where the selection is transitioning from on to off, right? And it is following the shape of the rotating gizmo because the animation that is defining that mask was created or derived from the rotating gizmo itself. Remember, we did a threshold. Actually, I didn't show you how to do that. I'll get back to that, but so let's continue here on this one first. So we are now combining, we are now looking through the selection mask that is actually turning with the gizmo frame for frame. And so now at this point, if we go and use that same filter for combining with the mixing of the two buffers, you can now either go to the left or to the right, and in the case where you go to the right, you're favoring everything from the swap buffer, but only where it actually is allowed, only where the alpha channel allows the blending to actually occur. The alpha channel is white over here on the background. That's where it is enabled. That's where it can actually happen. Whereas over here, the alpha channel is black. It is preventing any operation. It is preventing the blending or the mixing of the buffers. So what you can see is that here in this case, we don't do any mixing. Here in this case, we do 100% mixing or full intensity mixing, but only through the mask, only through the alpha channel. And so we end up actually combining the two where we want them. We want the sky to show here and the gizmo to remain showing here. Alright, so but we don't want that just on this one frame. We want that on the entire sequence of frames of the animation. So what we'll do is we'll go to the timeline and we'll find and pray that we have the same filter here. Sure enough, there is a collection of combine with swap, mix buffers, and voila. Alright, and as it rotates, it's going to keep doing that same thing. Apply that, and now you have an entire animation. You can ignore this little side effect of what's happening here. We are still looking into what's causing the colors to be a little bit off on the blended background there. I'm sure that's just a temporary bug. We'll probably fix that by the time we release. But even if it's not, you can now do a couple of other things. For instance, you can go and improve the contrast or change the hue. For instance, do a hue saturation value thing and say, okay, let's actually go change the hue of that background. Look at that. You didn't have to go back to Carrara and re-render that. You can now just change the hue of the background right there, or the saturation, or the value. All of that dynamically changes, but only through the background mask. Right? So let's say we want it like this. And there it is. Right? And let's say we want to also add a little bit of light diffusion is a good one on this. In the photographic collection there, a little bit of light diffusion. Not too much, we don't have time. There you go. That will just add a little bit of blur or glint, or I don't know what to call it. Another one that I really like a lot, and actually for this we really should get rid of the selection mask now, because we want to have it bleed into the entire image, not just on the background. So what we'll do is go to animation and turn the animated selection off, uncheck this, and then also make sure the selection mask itself is cleared, so we don't have it here anymore. And I don't care about the animated swap being still enabled, because we're not going to use it at this point anymore. One thing we do want to do is perhaps add one more filter, which is under the photographic collection here, and which happens to also have an animate mode. So let's go soft contrast improvement, and you can see that that one actually is going to do some interesting contrast improvement as well. And once we have the right tone, we can click on animate, and it's going to essentially apply that filter across all frames. So that's another step to get it there as well. Now my final top preferred filter here would be to actually also slow it down a little bit. Right now we are playing at 24 frames a second. Let's say we want this at 30. That's actually faster, not slower. But I really want to slow it down. So what I'll do is I'll go to the traditional filter and animated motion prediction module, and give it a dry run first. Try that initially like this. Looks pretty good, very clean. Hardly any twirly effects or side effects. So we can probably go into perhaps 9 times, or let's say 10 times, 11 times slower. And yes, beautiful. And only a little bit down here. When the sky is moving too fast, it's getting a little bit out of control, but barely visible. The object itself that's spinning there is just perfect. So what I'll do is get out of the dry run, give it a refinement pass to get to even better quality, and go. And so at this point, this will take a little bit longer, but it's definitely worth it. And you didn't have to render each of these frames in 3D. So this was not an example of something that took a long time to render. But if it had been, or maybe if the shaders were particularly complex, or the geometry and the level of rendering quality was such that it took maybe a minute per frame to render, it would be very time consuming to re-render the whole thing against a different background, or then to re-render it with so many more frames to slow it down. And so we have now with Dog Waffle the ability to kind of work around that and find other renderings, other backgrounds, other speeds, and so on, without having to go render it for hours on in your 3D program. And so here's what we just created. Very nice, smooth animation. And there are perhaps some other things that you could do in a case like this, and in particular the gizmo was not anti-aliased, so you see actually some pretty strong staircasing here. And so you could possibly actually have filtered or blurred the alpha channel image sequence, or the video with the alpha channel with the mask. And I have a couple of different versions. So here's the one that was the original, and I don't know if it will record that, but you'll see that one versus the slightly blurred version, which looks just like nicely anti-aliased. And all that we can do, of course, in Dog Waffle. Same thing with the background here. I have one here which is the original and showing fairly intense aliasing, because we didn't create the rendering with anti-aliasing. And here it's a little bit blurred, so we end up getting a nicer, smoother edge along the sides. So now, last step to show you is how did we actually create that mask in the first place, right? This one here was the original image, the original movie. How did we get it to this, and then by inversion get it to that, right? So how do you go from this original video here to this one? So that's done with the threshold filter. Let's go back to that. The way, let me save this one here quickly. You know what, I think I already did save it, or another version, so that'll be fine. I just wanted to have one I can show at the end of this training. Let's go to loading the original AVI. That's this one here, doc2. All right, and so now I have just this original video, and I want to threshold it. I want to make so that where it's black, it will remain black, and where it's non-black, any other color, it will be white. So you could possibly do that with some sort of a color picker, or I mean, it's basically a color keying that we want, but we want to do that straight into the animation. So what we'll do is let's test it here first with the filter, adjust threshold. And what you do with the threshold is you basically say, hey, let's go look for the brightest spots, and then not so bright, and even darker and darker until we find everything. And actually, when you bring it all the way down to black, to 0 here, you are going to stop where it's already black. It's going to stay there, but any other pixel that's maybe 1 off and brighter is going to be white. You can actually invert it right there if you want. And now that's not that's what we want, but we don't want it on just this one frame. So what we'll do is we'll do exactly the same thing here from the timeline and apply that filter called threshold. There it is. And we'll apply that over the entire sequence. Now on this one, on the animated one, we don't have the invert option. Not a big deal, we can always invert it afterwards. So let's go apply it. And here's your animated gizmo's shape. The profile, basically, where the gizmo is now white. And we need to invert that, no problem. Let's go. You can do that in 2 places. One is you can invert it here with the image invert. Or you could, and in fact, in this case, it will first apply to this one image on the current frame, right? And then ask you, do you want to apply this to the rest of the animation? And if you do that, it's done very quickly. Another place where you can invert things is actually under the filters in the timeline. Once more, you can go to adjust. Oh, there it is. Under the colors, you can go negative, or you can do invert. And since it's black and white, it'll be the same result. So that's another place where you can do that. All right, so that sums it up. Thanks for watching. Hope this is going to be useful in your attempts to composite different video clips together. If you have the need to and the means to identify the shape of the object against a background, and then that way to recomposite it with something else.